Hi, this is Rick Frederick. I'm just reviewing a paper by Professor John Myers, which is a review of the Supreme Court decision in Ohio v. Darius Clark. This article was published in Psychology, Public Policy, and Law. The paper begins with a thorough review of the facts of the case. In this case, a young boy, 3 years old, was discovered by his teachers to have marks on him. When they asked him who had done this to him, he told them his caretaker, Darius Clark, or D. And this led to the arrest of Clark for a large number of assaults and child abuse for not only the child in this case, but other children in the household. When the teachers asked the child who had injured him, it's the state's contention, the prosecution's contention, that they were doing so to safeguard the welfare of the child, and that they were not acting in any way to try to develop a case against Darius Clark. Therefore, they would argue that their efforts were not prosecutorial in nature. And according to Crawford v. Washington, this sort of statement from the child would be considered non-testimonial. Crawford v. Washington is a Supreme Court case in which the Supreme Court rejected much of the efforts to allow hearsay into prosecutions. And one of the constructions in that decision was the idea that some statements made by abuse victims should be considered non-testimonial. That is, made in an ongoing emergency, or made simply to get help and to extricate themselves from a dangerous situation. Other statements are made pursuant to an effort by the police to prosecute. So, since some victims do not testify at court, their statements are sometimes entered as hearsay. And so Professor Myers provides a very thorough discussion of the facts of the case and discussion about hearsay. He also discusses very effectively the hearsay exceptions in child abuse litigations. And he reviews Crawford v. Washington, the Supreme Court case, and constitutional bars under the Confrontation Clause of the Sixth Amendment to hearsay. He also effectively reviews testimonial versus non-testimonial utterances. So what happened in Ohio v. Clark is that the prosecution had the statements of the 3-year-old child entered as evidence that Darius Clark was the person who had injured the boy. And Darius Clark objected to that because the statements were made to teachers who had asked the child who had done this, and Clark's contention was that because the teachers were mandatory reporters, that they were effectively agents of the government. Now, an appellate court in Ohio and the Supreme Court of Ohio agreed with Clark's argument and overturned his conviction. It was appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court, and their issue was that whether the teacher's primary purpose in questioning the child was to gather evidence for possible use in future criminal proceedings. And therefore, if that was their primary purpose, then the child's statement would be classified as testimonial and correctly rejected for the hearsay exception. So what the Supreme Court decided was that, in a unanimous decision, that the statements were not testimonial, could be introduced. The Supreme Court rejected the theory of the Ohio Supreme Court and affirmed the conviction of Darius Clark. So the other thing that Professor Myers does very nicely in this paper is to review the number of briefs filed in this case. arguing for and against certain positions. Very nice paper. Read it through several times and you have a good understanding of the decision in Ohio v. Clark.